Have you ever questioned the thoughts that dominate your mind every day? What if the way you think is the very reason you feel stuck, anxious, or even unhappy? In Joseph Nguyen's Don't Believe Everything You Think, he reveals a powerful truth. The root of suffering isn't your circumstances, it's your attachment to your own thoughts. But here's the real question. Is it possible to break free? Can you truly find peace by rethinking the way you think? Stick with me, because this book just might change the way you see yourself and your life forever. Let's uncover the answers together. Chapter 1: The Journey to Discovering the Root Cause of Suffering. The first chapter opens with a profound question. Why do we suffer? Most of us assume it's because of external circumstances, difficult relationships, financial struggles, or the countless challenges life throws our way. But this chapter challenges that assumption, urging us to look deeper. It reveals a startling truth. Suffering doesn't originate from the world around us. It stems from our own minds. The root cause of suffering is not the events we experience, but how we perceive and interpret them. Our thoughts, those constant narratives running in our heads, shape our reality. We cling to these thoughts, labeling some as good and others as bad. This attachment creates a cycle of judgment, resistance, and ultimately, pain. The chapter explains that suffering arises not because of what happens to us, but because we believe the stories our minds create about those events. The chapter guides readers to recognize the deceptive power of their thinking. It explains how our minds are wired to fixate on problems, amplify fears, and distort reality. This mental chatter convinces us that we are victims of life's circumstances, trapping us in an endless loop of dissatisfaction. The more we identify with our thoughts, the more we suffer. But there's a way out. The chapter introduces the concept of awareness as the first step toward freedom. When we step back and observe our thoughts instead of blindly believing them, we create space. In that space, we begin to see that we are not our thoughts. We are the consciousness observing those thoughts. This realization is powerful. It dismantles the illusion that our thinking defines us. The chapter also addresses a common misconception that eliminating negative thoughts will end suffering. It argues that the goal isn't to stop thinking or to control the mind. Instead, the path to peace lies in accepting thoughts as they come, without attaching to or resisting them. By letting thoughts flow without judgment, we stop giving them the power to control us. This chapter is both unsettling and liberating. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that much of our pain is self-inflicted, yet it offers hope by showing that freedom is within reach. The root of suffering is not out there in the world, but within us, and that means the solution is also within us. The journey outlined in this chapter is not about fixing the external world, but about transforming our inner relationship with it. By questioning the validity of our thoughts and embracing the power of awareness, we can begin to loosen the grip of suffering and move toward a life of clarity and peace. In essence, this chapter invites readers to shift from being prisoners of their minds to becoming masters of their inner world. It's the first step in a transformative journey, one that begins not with changing what we see, but how we see it. Chapter 2: The Root Cause of Suffering. This chapter takes a deeper dive into understanding the true source of human suffering, stripping away the layers of illusion we often live under. It challenges the deeply ingrained belief that our pain comes from external events, people, or circumstances. Instead, it unveils a radical truth. The root cause of suffering is our attachment to our thoughts. Our minds constantly churn out a stream of thoughts, judgments, fears, expectations, and interpretations. While this mental chatter is natural, the problem arises when we believe every thought we think. We cling to these narratives, treating them as absolute truths even when they're distorted or unhelpful. This attachment is what transforms ordinary life events into sources of frustration, sadness, or anxiety. The chapter uses the metaphor of a storm to describe our thoughts. Just as the weather naturally shifts from sunny to stormy, so do our minds. But the storm itself isn't the problem. The problem lies in identifying with the storm, convincing ourselves that we are the storm, instead of recognizing that it will pass. When we mistake our transient thoughts for our identity, we allow them to control our emotions and actions, perpetuating a cycle of suffering. One of the chapter's most eye-opening ideas is that suffering isn't caused by the thoughts themselves, but by the meaning we attach to them. A fleeting thought like, "I'm not good enough," can arise in anyone's mind. It's when we latch onto that thought, believe it, and allow it to define us that it becomes a source of pain. This attachment creates a false sense of self, a fragile identity built on fleeting and often negative thoughts. The chapter also explores how this attachment is fueled by the ego, which thrives on labeling and separation. The ego constantly seeks validation, approval, and control, creating inner conflict when reality doesn't align with its expectations. It convinces us that happiness lies in achieving certain outcomes or avoiding discomfort, keeping us trapped in a relentless pursuit of something we can never quite attain. But there's hope. The chapter introduces the concept of detachment, not in the sense of apathy, but as a conscious choice to let go of identifying with our thoughts. Detachment allows us to observe our mental chatter without being consumed by it. By recognizing that thoughts are just thoughts, not truths, we begin to reclaim our power. The chapter offers a profound insight. Suffering is optional. While pain is an inevitable part of life, suffering arises from resisting what is or clinging to what isn't. When we learn to let go of the need to control, judge, or fix our thoughts, we discover a sense of inner freedom. This chapter is a wake-up call to question the stories we tell ourselves and the beliefs we hold onto so tightly. It shows that the path to peace isn't about changing the world around us, but about changing our relationship with our minds. By loosening our grip on thoughts, we create space for clarity, acceptance, and ultimately, true happiness. Chapter 3. Why do we think? This chapter invites readers to question something so fundamental that it often goes unnoticed. Why do we think at all? At first glance, the answer might seem obvious. Thinking is essential for solving problems, making decisions, and navigating life. But this chapter reveals that most of our thoughts are not as useful as we believe. Instead, much of our thinking is habitual, reactive, and even harmful. The chapter begins by exploring the evolutionary purpose of thinking. It explains that our minds evolved to analyze, predict, and problem solve as a means of survival. In the past, this constant mental activity helped our ancestors avoid danger and secure resources. However, in today's world, the threats we face are rarely life or death. Yet our minds continue to operate as if they are, constantly scanning for problems to solve or threats to eliminate. This leads to a cycle of overthinking where the mind magnifies minor issues and creates unnecessary stress. One of the chapter's most striking insights is that thinking is often a coping mechanism for discomfort. When we feel uncertain, anxious, or out of control, we instinctively turn to thinking as a way to regain a sense of stability. The mind generates endless scenarios, solutions, and what-if questions, hoping to soothe our unease. But instead of bringing clarity, this overthinking often amplifies our fears and disconnects us from the present moment. The chapter also explores how thinking is deeply tied to our sense of identity. The mind uses thoughts to construct a narrative about who we are, what we've experienced, and where we're headed. While this narrative can provide a sense of continuity, it also limits us. We become trapped in the stories we tell ourselves, clinging to past hurts, future worries, or labels that no longer serve us. But why does the mind do this? The chapter suggests that thinking is a way for the ego to maintain control. The ego thrives on creating problems it can solve, conflicts it can resolve, and a sense of separation it can reinforce. It convinces us that we are incomplete as we are, driving us to think endlessly about how to fix ourselves or our lives. This relentless mental activity keeps us distracted from the present moment, where true peace resides. The chapter encourages readers to see that while thinking is a tool, it is not the essence of who we are. We are not our thoughts, we are the awareness behind them. This realization allows us to step back from the constant noise of the mind and use thinking intentionally rather than letting it control us. Ultimately, this chapter shifts the way we view our mental activity. It's not about demonizing thinking, but understanding its role and limitations. Thinking can be a powerful ally when used consciously, but when left unchecked, it becomes a source of suffering. The key is learning to think less and be present more, freeing ourselves from the endless loop of mental noise and reclaiming the peace that comes from simply being. Chapter 4: Thoughts versus Thinking. In this chapter, a pivotal distinction is made between thoughts and thinking, two concepts that are often mistakenly understood as one and the same. The chapter unfolds a critical insight that can fundamentally shift the way we experience our minds. While we often believe that we are defined by our thoughts, the truth is we are not our thoughts. Instead, we are the awareness that observes them. Understanding this difference is the key to ending the cycle of suffering that so many of us unknowingly perpetuate. The chapter begins by exploring what we typically think of as thoughts. These are the individual mental fragments that arise in our minds: memories, judgments, worries, ideas, and beliefs. Thoughts come and go, sometimes like fleeting clouds drifting across the sky, sometimes like waves crashing on the shore. They can be useful, helping us to solve problems, plan for the future, or recall past experiences. However, the issue arises when we believe that we are our thoughts. We start to identify with them, assuming that whatever thought appears is an irrefutable reflection of who we are. This creates an illusion of permanence and control, making us think that we are stuck with whatever negative or limiting belief pops up in our minds. On the other hand, thinking is the ongoing mental process, the machinery behind our thoughts. It's the activity of the mind that generates the continuous stream of thoughts we experience. The distinction here is crucial. Thoughts are the content, while thinking is the process. Just as a river carries a flow of water, thinking carries of thoughts. Most people are so caught up in this flow that they forget they are merely witnessing it, not controlling it. The chapter dives into how this misunderstanding of thoughts versus thinking leads to suffering. We are not helpless victims of our thoughts, even though it often feels that way. Instead, we have the power to observe our thoughts with detachment. When we stop identifying with them, we break free from the constant churn of the mind. This realization opens the door to true freedom, the freedom to think less, to be less attached to the mental noise, and to rest in the stillness that lies beneath. This is where awareness becomes a powerful tool. The chapter emphasizes the importance of observing thoughts without judgment or attachment. By becoming the observer of our thinking, rather than the thinker, we stop getting caught in the web of our mental patterns. We stop believing that our thoughts define us or our reality. This subtle shift in perspective allows us to experience life more fully and peacefully, without being dragged down by the turbulence of incessant thinking. In addition, the chapter also highlights how our attachment to thinking creates a sense of constant mental effort. We often feel that we need to think our way out of problems or that we need to have a solution for everything. But this relentless pursuit of answers keeps us trapped in a cycle of anxiety and stress. True peace, the chapter suggests, comes not from thinking more, but from thinking less. It's in the moments when we allow our minds to quiet, when we let go of the need to constantly do, that we access the clarity and calm that reside within us. By distinguishing between thoughts and thinking, this chapter provides a pathway to end the suffering caused by our overactive minds. It reminds us that we have a choice: to identify with the flood of thoughts or to simply observe them, recognizing their transient nature. This shift from identification to awareness is the key to breaking free from the prison of the mind and experiencing the profound freedom that comes from being present in the moment. Chapter 5, But Don't We Need to Think Positively? This chapter confronts one of the most common misconceptions in the world of personal development: the belief that we must constantly think positively to overcome suffering and lead a successful life. We've all heard the advice to stay positive or look on the bright side, but what if that approach is not only ineffective, but actually part of the problem? This chapter challenges the notion that positive thinking is the ultimate solution to our mental struggles, offering a more profound and sustainable approach to peace of mind. At first, the chapter acknowledges the well-intentioned value of positive thinking. After all, focusing on the positive can help shift our mindset from despair to hope, from fear to courage. However, the chapter swiftly points out a critical flaw in this mindset. It encourages denial. Positive thinking, when taken to the extreme, becomes a form of avoidance. Instead of addressing the root causes of our discomfort or pain, it pushes us to suppress negative feelings and pretend that everything is okay when it might not be. In essence, it asks us to lie to ourselves. The chapter explains that this forced optimism doesn't create true inner peace. It may momentarily distract us from our problems, but it doesn't remove the underlying anxiety, guilt, or sadness we feel. In fact, repressing negative emotions often leads to their intensification. The more we try to push our discomfort away, the more we end up feeding it, which keeps us trapped in a cycle of denial and frustration. Instead of seeking to think positively all the time, the chapter introduces a more liberating idea: embracing reality as it is. The key to overcoming suffering isn't about denying our negative thoughts or emotions, it's about accepting them without attaching meaning or judgment to them. Rather than trying to control or force our thoughts into a positive direction, we learn to observe them as they come and go. This shift in mindset, from trying to fix or eliminate unwanted thoughts to simply acknowledging them, is where true freedom begins. By allowing ourselves to feel whatever emotions arise, whether they're positive or negative, we break the cycle of resistance. This chapter encourages a deeper understanding of how thoughts and emotions are transient. They don't define us, and they don't have to control our lives. It's not about suppressing negative thoughts, but about realizing that we don't have to believe them or act on them. We can let them pass by like clouds in the sky without becoming attached to their fleeting presence. The chapter also explores how this approach leads to more authentic growth. Positive thinking often stems from a desire to avoid discomfort or to reach an idealized version of ourselves. However, true personal growth comes from embracing both the light and dark aspects of life. It's through accepting our full range of emotions and thoughts that we can move past them, heal, and ultimately experience deeper levels of peace and joy. In conclusion, this chapter challenges the conventional wisdom of positive thinking by encouraging readers to approach their thoughts and emotions with mindfulness and acceptance rather than avoidance. It's not about thinking positive all the time, but about being present with whatever arises without judgment. In doing so, we unlock the power to live with clarity, peace, and genuine happiness, no matter what thoughts or feelings come our way. Chapter 6. How do we stop thinking? In this chapter, the author confronts a question many of us have asked at some point. How do we stop the constant flood of thoughts in our minds? With our brains constantly buzzing with mental chatter, it can feel like we're prisoners to our own thinking. We long for peace, but it seems elusive. The chapter begins by challenging the common assumption that the goal is to stop thinking altogether. The truth is, the mind's nature is to think. It's a continuous, ever-present process. The real question is not how to stop thinking, but how to stop being controlled by it. The chapter opens with the powerful idea that we don't need to eliminate thoughts to experience freedom from them. In fact, trying to stop thinking is an exercise in frustration. Every time we try to suppress or control our thoughts, we only feed them more energy. The harder we try to quiet the mind, the louder the noise becomes. Instead of fighting against our thoughts, the chapter encourages a shift in approach: awareness. Awareness is the key to breaking free from the tyranny of thought. The chapter explains that thoughts are not inherently good or bad, they simply arise and pass. But we often attach meaning to them, either getting swept away in them or resisting them. When we learn to observe our thoughts without identifying with them, we begin to loosen their grip. The goal is not to control the mind, but to witness it. By stepping back and observing the thoughts as they come and go, we stop seeing them as truths and start seeing them as fleeting events in the mind. This shift in perspective is incredibly liberating. Instead of being reactive to every thought that arises, we become active participants in the way we relate to our minds. The chapter likens this process to watching a river flow. Thoughts are like the water, always moving and changing while we remain the observer, unaffected by the current. This detachment doesn't mean we stop thinking altogether. It means we stop believing every thought and start recognizing that they don't define us. The chapter also delves into the power of the present moment as a tool for quieting the mind. most of our thoughts are rooted in either the past or the future. We ruminate on past mistakes or anxieties about what's to come. However, by grounding ourselves in the present, we disrupt this cycle. Simple practices like focusing on our breath, engaging in mindful activities, or even just observing the world around us can help anchor us in the now, where thoughts have less power over us. Another key insight in this chapter is the role of acceptance. When we stop resisting our thoughts, they lose their power. It's not about suppressing them, but about letting them be without getting caught up in them. The chapter suggests that by simply allowing thoughts to arise and fade away without judgment, we create a sense of peace. We stop fighting the mind and instead make peace with it. Ultimately, this chapter reveals that the solution isn't to stop thinking, but to stop letting thoughts control us. By cultivating awareness, staying present, and accepting thoughts without attachment, we can experience a profound sense of freedom. We no longer need to be ruled by our mental noise. Instead, we can exist in the stillness between thoughts, where true peace and clarity lie. Chapter 7: Practical Steps for How to Stop Thinking. In this chapter, the author presents actionable, practical steps to help break free from the overwhelming flood of thoughts that often consume our minds. While we can't completely stop thinking, because that's the natural function of the mind, the goal here is to learn how to stop being controlled by our thoughts. This chapter offers clear, impactful strategies to help us achieve a greater sense of mental clarity, inner peace, and presence in the face of constant mental noise. One of the key practices discussed in this chapter is mindfulness. Mindfulness involves fully engaging in the present moment without judgment or distraction. By anchoring ourselves in the here and now, we interrupt the mind's habitual tendency to dwell on the past or worry about the future. The chapter encourages starting with simple, everyday activities like eating, walking, or even breathing as opportunities to practice mindfulness. When we focus intently on the sensations of these activities, we take our attention away from the constant churn of thoughts and bring ourselves back to the present moment. This technique, though simple, is incredibly powerful for quieting the mind and creating space for inner calm. Another critical step involves cultivating awareness of our thoughts as they arise. Instead of identifying with each thought that passes through our mind, we can learn to observe them objectively, as though we were watching clouds drifting across the sky. This practice of detachment helps us to recognize that thoughts are not who we are. They're simply mental events. The more we practice this awareness, the easier it becomes to separate our sense of self from our thoughts, reducing their power over us. The chapter suggests that by regularly observing our thoughts without judgment or reaction, we begin to create a mental distance that allows us to stay grounded in the present moment. The chapter also emphasizes the power of breathing exercises to calm the mind. Breathing is a natural rhythmic process that connects us to our body and the present moment. When we feel overwhelmed by thoughts, the chapter suggests taking a few deep, conscious breaths, focusing solely on the breath as it enters and exits the body. This simple act of mindful breathing disrupts the mental noise and helps us return to a place of stillness. The chapter describes how, with practice, these breathing techniques can become an instant tool to regain control of our minds in stressful or distracting situations. Additionally, the chapter introduces the concept of thought interruption. Instead of trying to suppress or eliminate unwanted thoughts, which often only strengthens them, we can actively redirect our focus. One technique is to consciously replace negative or intrusive thoughts with something positive or neutral. For example, when a worry or fear arises, we can intentionally shift our attention to something calming, like a favorite memory, an image of nature, or a mantra that brings us peace. This shift in focus disrupts the momentum of unwanted thoughts and trains the mind to redirect its energy in a more constructive direction. The chapter also highlights the importance of creating space for silence. In our fast-paced world, we are often surrounded by noise, both external and internal. By intentionally creating moments of quiet throughout the day, we allow the mind to settle. The chapter suggests scheduling periods of intentional stillness, whether it's through meditation, walking in nature, or simply sitting in silence for a few minutes. These moments of quiet reset the mind, reduce mental clutter, and offer us a break from the constant thinking that can drain our energy and focus. Ultimately, this chapter offers a practical toolkit for regaining control over our thoughts. Rather than attempting to stop thinking altogether, the goal is to become more aware of our thoughts, detach from them, and learn how to redirect our mental energy. By practicing mindfulness, breathing exercises, thought interruption, and silence, we can create a deeper sense of inner peace and freedom from the tyranny of the mind. These steps empower us to reclaim our mental space and find clarity in the chaos of everyday life. Chapter 8: How can we possibly thrive in the world without thinking? In this chapter, the author tackles one of the most pressing questions that arise when we consider breaking free from the constant stream of thoughts. How can we possibly thrive in the world without thinking? After all, thinking is essential to decision-making, problem-solving, and understanding the world around us. Without thinking, how can we function in a complex, fast-paced world? This chapter offers a profound answer that challenges the conventional view of thinking as the primary tool for success and fulfillment. The author begins by acknowledging the importance of thinking in our daily lives. Thinking helps us navigate through life, make choices, and engage with the world intellectually. However, the chapter shifts the focus to the distinction between thinking as an ongoing mental process and thoughts as the individual products of that process. While thinking is necessary in many situations, the chapter argues that our over-reliance on constant mental activity is a major cause of suffering, stress, and burnout. The key, then, is not to eliminate thinking entirely, but to find a balance and use thinking more intentionally, rather than letting it run unchecked. To thrive in the world without being ruled by endless thoughts, the chapter suggests we must shift our relationship with thinking. Instead of constantly trying to think our way through problems or micromanage every aspect of our lives, we can learn to act from a place of inner stillness and clarity. By practicing mindfulness and presence, we can tap into a deeper sense of knowing that goes beyond intellectual thought. This allows us to make decisions and take actions with greater ease, confidence, and creativity without being paralyzed by overthinking. The author explains that true thriving doesn't come from endlessly analyzing every situation or predicting every possible outcome. In fact, excessive thinking often gets in the way of our ability to respond to life with intuition and spontaneity. When we are constantly trapped in mental chatter, we miss out on the richness of the present moment and the subtle cues that life provides. By quieting the mind, we open ourselves up to a higher state of awareness where solutions and insights arise naturally. This chapter introduces the concept of embodied intelligence. Rather than relying solely on our cognitive mind, we can also learn to trust the wisdom of our bodies, emotions, and intuition. The chapter highlights how many of the most successful and fulfilling actions in life come not from overthinking, but from aligning with the present moment and allowing life to unfold naturally. This embodied way of knowing is often more effective and authentic than relying on mental analysis alone. The chapter also stresses that thriving isn't about being passive or disconnected from the world. Instead, it's about engaging with life fully, but without the burden of excessive mental noise. When we let go of the need to constantly think and control everything, we can experience life more fully, make better decisions, and interact with others more authentically. The author points out that the most successful people in life are not necessarily those who overanalyze every detail, but those who act from a place of grounded presence and clarity. Ultimately, the chapter argues that thriving without constant thinking is not only possible, but it is the key to living a peaceful, purposeful, and joyful life. By shifting from a mindset of continuous thought to one of awareness and presence, we open ourselves up to the full experience of life, one that is less fraught with anxiety and more aligned with our true selves. Thriving comes not from thinking more, but from thinking less and embracing the deep intelligence that resides beyond the mind. Chapter 9: What about our goals, dreams, and ambitions? In this chapter, the author delves into one of the most profound and often misunderstood aspects of personal growth: our goals, dreams, and ambitions. In a world that constantly pushes us to strive for more, achieve bigger, and become the best version of ourselves, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the pressure to always be chasing the next success. But what if our fixation on achieving these external markers of success is actually causing us more stress and suffering? This chapter challenges the conventional wisdom around ambition and offers a transformative perspective on how we can approach our goals in a way that promotes true fulfillment and inner peace. The chapter begins by recognizing the natural human desire to set goals and pursue dreams. After all, goals give us direction, purpose, and a sense of achievement. Ambitions can motivate us to grow, learn, and accomplish things that contribute to our sense of identity and self-worth. However, the author quickly points out that our relentless focus on future outcomes can trap us in a cycle of dissatisfaction. When we place all of our happiness, success, and validation in the future, we miss the richness of the present moment. Instead of enjoying the journey, we are constantly chasing a destination that, once reached, often feels empty or fleeting. The key insight in this chapter is that goals and dreams are not inherently bad, but it's our attachment to them that creates suffering. Chapter 2 suggests that when we become overly identified with our goals, we risk losing sight of our deeper values and desires. We become consumed by the idea of becoming something rather than being who we already are. This constant striving leads to a state of perpetual dissatisfaction, where we are always looking to the future for fulfillment rather than finding contentment in the present. The author introduces the concept of intentionality, the idea of setting goals and pursuing dreams with a sense of purpose and awareness without clinging to the outcome. Instead of focusing solely on achieving a specific result, we are encouraged to reconnect with the deeper reasons why we want to achieve our goals in the first place. What drives us? What is the underlying motivation behind our ambitions? By aligning our goals with our values and passions, we can move through life with intention rather than blindly chasing external markers of success. Another profound insight in this chapter is that true fulfillment does not come from external achievements, but from cultivating an internal sense of peace, clarity, and joy. When we let go of the need to constantly measure our success or compare ourselves to others, we free ourselves from the trap of constant striving. The author suggests that true contentment arises when we focus on being present in the moment, rather than placing all of our energy on the pursuit of future outcomes. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of non-attachment. While we are encouraged to pursue our dreams, we are reminded that we cannot control every outcome. By releasing the grip on our need to achieve, we open ourselves to a more relaxed, organic way of moving through life. This doesn't mean abandoning our ambitions or becoming complacent. Rather, it's about engaging with our goals in a way that is driven by passion and purpose, rather than fear or need. Ultimately, this chapter presents a radical shift in how we view success and ambition. It asks us to move beyond the traditional idea of success as a destination to be reached and invites us to embrace a journey of intentional, purpose-driven growth. True fulfillment lies not in the achievement of external goals, but in the alignment of our dreams with our inner values, a balanced perspective on the present moment, and a deep sense of peace within ourselves. By releasing attachment to outcomes and focusing on the process, we can find lasting happiness and thrive in a way that is both authentic and sustainable. Chapter 10. Nothing is either good or bad. In this eye-opening chapter, the author challenges one of the most deeply ingrained beliefs in our thinking, the idea that events, experiences, and circumstances can be inherently good or bad. It's a belief that shapes much of our emotional and mental life, influencing how we react to everything that happens around us. But what if everything we label as good or bad is merely a product of our perception? What if our constant judgments of situations are the very source of much of our suffering? This chapter invites us to reconsider the way we assign meaning to everything in our lives, offering a radical shift in perspective that can lead to profound freedom. The chapter opens by addressing the fact that we, as human beings, have a natural tendency to categorize experiences as either positive or negative. We celebrate success and happiness, and we resist failure, pain, or discomfort. This binary way of thinking gives us a sense of control, but it also creates a world of constant conflict. Every bad experience generates frustration, resentment, or fear, while every good experience comes with a fear of losing it. The chapter suggests that this constant judgment of experiences, of labeling them as good or bad, is not only exhausting, but also limiting. We become prisoners of our own mental classifications, trapped in cycles of desire and aversion. The author points out that nothing in the world inherently carries the qualities of being good or bad. These labels are constructs of the mind, ways we interpret and react to what happens. What one person perceives as a blessing, another may see as a curse. What one person calls failure, another may recognize as a valuable lesson or opportunity for growth. This realization opens the door to a more liberated approach to life. Instead of attaching rigid labels to our experiences, we can choose to simply observe them as they are, without adding the layers of judgment that create unnecessary suffering. The chapter explains that it is our attachment to these judgments that causes our emotional reactions. When something happens that we label as bad, we feel a sense of loss, anger, or fear. When something happens that we label as good, we feel elation or a sense of satisfaction, but often with the underlying fear that it could be lost. This constant cycle of clinging and resisting keeps us from experiencing life as it truly is. By releasing the attachment to these labels, we free ourselves from the emotional highs and lows that come with them. In this chapter, the author also introduces the idea of embracing life's inherent uncertainty. We cannot always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. When we stop labeling everything that happens as good or bad, we create space to respond with openness and curiosity rather than resistance. This shift allows us to meet each moment without judgment, accepting whatever arises with equanimity. We stop seeing life as a battle between opposing forces and instead recognize it as a flow of experiences that come and go. The chapter encourages us to adopt a mindset of non-attachment, not in the sense of disengagement, but in the sense of not being bound by our perceptions of what's good or bad. When we stop reacting to life with rigid expectations, we can approach everything with a sense of presence and acceptance. Challenges become opportunities for growth, setbacks become lessons, and moments of joy are enjoyed without the need for constant clinging. Ultimately, the message of this chapter is that our suffering stems from our judgments and labels. By letting go of the need to define everything in terms of good or bad, we can experience life more fully and peacefully. When we embrace each moment as it is without judgment, we create a space for greater peace, clarity, and freedom. Life no longer needs to be a battle of opposites, but a fluid experience of acceptance, flow, and opportunity. Chapter 11: How to Follow Your Intuition. In this chapter, the author reveals the profound wisdom of intuition, an inner guidance system that often gets drowned out by the noise of overthinking and external expectations. Intuition, the subtle voice that speaks from within, is one of the most powerful tools we have for navigating life. Yet, in a world that constantly emphasizes logic, reason, and analytical thinking, intuition is often overlooked or dismissed. This chapter guides us on how to reconnect with and trust our intuitive wisdom, offering a fresh perspective on how we can navigate life's complexities more authentically and with greater ease. The chapter begins by acknowledging that intuition is not some mystical or abstract force, but a deeply rooted natural ability within each of us. It's the gut feeling, the quiet nudge, or the inner knowing that arises when faced with a decision. The challenge, however, lies in recognizing and trusting this intuitive guidance, as it often feels subtle compared to the louder, more demanding voices of fear, doubt, and rational thinking. Many people dismiss their intuition because it doesn't always align with what the mind thinks should happen. But the chapter emphasizes that intuition operates beyond the realm of logic and is often more aligned with our true desires and purpose. A significant portion of the chapter is dedicated to helping us distinguish between intuition and other mental processes, such as fear or wishful thinking. Intuition isn't the same as the voice of anxiety or the desire to avoid discomfort. It's not about escaping reality or seeking validation. Instead, it's a quiet, grounded knowing that guides us toward what's best for our growth and well-being. The author explains that the key difference between intuition and other mental states is that intuition feels calm, certain, and without the urgency or pressure that often accompanies fear or overthinking. To reconnect with our intuition, the chapter suggests several practical steps. One of the most effective methods is to quiet the mind. In the fast-paced, overstimulated world we live in, it's easy for the voice of intuition to be drowned out by mental chatter. The chapter encourages practices such as mindfulness, meditation, and simply sitting in silence to create the space needed to hear our inner voice more clearly. It's in these moments of stillness that our intuition has the opportunity to surface, offering us the insights and guidance we need. Another essential step to following intuition is learning to trust it, even when it doesn't make logical sense. Often, our minds demand concrete evidence or a clear, rational explanation for every decision. However, intuition often works in a more abstract way, offering us a sense of knowing without the need for immediate justification. The chapter encourages us to take action based on our intuitive guidance, regardless of how uncertain or unproven the path may seem. Over time, as we act on our intuition and witness its results, our trust in it deepens, allowing us to follow it more confidently. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of being attuned to our body's signals. Our body often communicates our intuition through physical sensations like a feeling of lightness, tension, or discomfort. These bodily cues are powerful indicators of our true desires and instincts, offering us additional clarity when we're faced with difficult choices. By tuning into our physical sensations, we can deepen our connection to our intuitive wisdom. Lastly, the author reminds us that intuition is not about always knowing what's going to happen next. It's about being in tune with the present moment and responding from a place of authenticity and inner knowing. The more we practice listening to and trusting our intuition, the more we realize that it doesn't lead us astray. It guides us toward a life that feels more aligned with our true selves. In the end, following our intuition is a process of surrendering to the wisdom that already exists within us. It's about quieting the noise of external influences and trusting that when we listen closely, we already know the way forward. Chapter 12, Creating Space for Insight. In this transformative chapter, the author explores the concept of insight, those sudden moments of clarity or understanding that arise when we step out of the constant stream of thinking and allow space for deeper wisdom to emerge. Insight is not something we can force or manufacture with our minds. Rather, it arises naturally when we create the conditions for it to flourish. This chapter offers a compelling invitation to embrace stillness, silence, and presence, revealing how the simple act of creating space can unlock profound wisdom and lead to life-changing realizations. The chapter begins by addressing one of the greatest barriers to insight, the overwhelming flood of thoughts that dominate our minds. Our tendency to constantly think, analyze, and dissect keeps us trapped in mental loops, preventing us from experiencing true clarity. We live in a world that values constant productivity and mental activity, often seeing these as signs of intelligence or success. But the author argues that this constant mental noise can be a barrier to deeper understanding. Insight doesn't come from thinking harder or analyzing more. It comes from creating the space for something new to arise. The author introduces the concept of mental space, the pause between thoughts, the quiet gap where insight can enter. It's in these moments of stillness, when our minds aren't engaged in endless chatter, that we can access a deeper sense of knowing. The chapter suggests that creating this mental space isn't about trying to control or eliminate thoughts, but rather about learning to observe them without attachment. When we stop identifying so strongly with our thoughts, we create room for insight to emerge naturally. A key point the author makes is that insight is not a product of effort, but of receptivity. We can't force insights to come to us. They arise when we are open and present. The chapter encourages practices like mindfulness and meditation to help us cultivate this receptive state of mind. By consciously creating moments of quiet throughout our day, we allow our minds to reset and make space for deeper awareness to come through. These practices train us to be present with what is, rather than constantly trying to fix, control, or analyze every moment. The chapter also emphasizes that insight often arises when we stop seeking it. The more we chase after answers or try to force clarity, the more elusive it becomes. Insight is something that emerges when we are fully engaged in the present moment, not when we are trying to solve problems or make decisions. When we step away from the pressure to find solutions, we open ourselves to receiving them in unexpected ways. Sometimes the most profound insights come when we are least expecting them, during a walk in nature, in a quiet moment of reflection, or even in a casual conversation with a friend. One of the author's most powerful insights in this chapter is that space is not a void, but a fertile ground for growth. We often fear empty spaces, both mentally and physically, because they seem like nothingness. However, the author encourages us to see these spaces as opportunities for new possibilities, creativity, and understanding to emerge. Instead of filling every moment with activity or noise, we can begin to appreciate the power of pause. It's in the silence that we allow the seeds of insight to take root. The chapter concludes by reminding us that insight is not about gaining more knowledge, but about seeing things as they truly are. When we create the mental space for clarity, we stop relying on our thinking mind to tell us what is right or wrong, and instead, we open ourselves to deeper truths. These truths don't come from external sources, they arise from within when we create the space for them to surface. Insight is not just an intellectual understanding, it's a profound shift in perception that leads to greater peace, clarity, and a deeper connection with life. In the end, the author shows us that the key to insight is not striving for it, but stepping back and creating the conditions for it to arise naturally. When we give ourselves the gift of stillness and space, we unlock the wisdom that is always available to us, and our lives are transformed in ways we never imagined. Chapter 13, Potential Obstacles When Living in Non-Thinking. In this chapter, the author delves into the challenges we may encounter when we attempt to live in a state of non-thinking. The space of presence and stillness where we step away from the constant activity of the mind. While living in non-thinking holds the promise of greater clarity, peace, and freedom, it is not without its obstacles. These obstacles are often subtle yet powerful, and they can easily pull us back into the familiar patterns of mental noise and distraction. This chapter offers a candid exploration of the difficulties we might face and provides insights on how to navigate them to maintain a peaceful, centered state. One of the primary obstacles the author addresses is the sheer resistance of the mind itself. The mind is habitually active. It's wired to think, analyze, judge, and plan. The idea of letting go of this constant stream of thoughts feels unnatural and even uncomfortable. For many, the act of non-thinking can feel like a void or emptiness that we instinctively resist. The mind often convinces us that we need to stay busy and engaged, as if doing so is necessary for survival or success. This habitual thinking creates a kind of mental inertia that can make the transition into stillness and presence challenging. The chapter goes on to explain how fear is another significant obstacle. When we stop our constant mental chatter, we may experience a deep-seated fear of what lies beneath. Our thoughts have become our identity, and without them, we may feel lost or vulnerable. This fear can arise because we associate our sense of self with the stream of thoughts that continuously occupy our minds. By letting go of these thoughts, we feel like we are letting go of who we are. However, the author reassures us that this fear is merely a reflection of our attachment to our thinking patterns. In reality, by letting go of mental noise, we are connecting to a deeper, more authentic sense of self, one that is not bound by thoughts. Another challenge mentioned in the chapter is the societal pressure to constantly be doing or thinking. In a world that prizes productivity, efficiency, and intellectual achievement, living in non-thinking can feel counterintuitive. Our culture often equates busyness with value, and stepping away from constant mental activity may make us feel guilty or unproductive. We may fear that we are falling behind or not fulfilling our responsibilities if we take time to simply be present. However, the author emphasizes that true productivity and clarity arise not from constant doing, but from the quiet space where insight and creativity can emerge. By embracing non-thinking, we allow ourselves the freedom to approach tasks with fresh perspectives and deeper energy. The chapter also discusses the challenge of constant distractions. In today's world, we are bombarded by external stimuli: social media, emails, notifications, and endless demands on our attention. These distractions constantly pull us away from the present moment and reinforce our attachment to mental activity. The author suggests that to live in non-thinking, we must actively create space for stillness by reducing these distractions. This may involve setting boundaries around technology, finding quiet spaces, or dedicating time each day to mindfulness practices. By consciously removing external noise, we make it easier to quiet our inner dialogue and experience the present moment more fully. Finally, the author reflects on the difficulty of maintaining non-thinking in the midst of emotional turbulence. When strong emotions arise, the mind often becomes flooded with stories, judgments, and reactions. In these moments, it's easy to get swept up in the mental drama, losing sight of the stillness we seek. However, the chapter encourages us to see emotions as temporary and not as part of our permanent identity. By acknowledging our emotions without attaching judgment or engaging in the mental chatter they provoke, we can maintain our connection to the present moment. In conclusion, the chapter teaches that living in non-thinking is not about completely eliminating thought, but about learning to create space for stillness, presence, and clarity. Whether mental resistance, fear, societal pressure, distractions, or emotional turbulence are all part of the process. With patience, practice, and awareness, we can learn to navigate these challenges, creating the space for insight and peace that is always available to us. Chapter 14, Unconditional Love. In this powerful chapter, the author invites us to discover the profound nature of unconditional love, a love that transcends conditions, expectations, and the confines of our thinking mind. Unconditional love is a force that doesn't require us to change, perform, or meet any standards to be worthy of it. It is the purest form of love, emanating not from our mental constructs, but from the deep well of presence and awareness within us. This chapter challenges us to rethink what love truly is, and to embrace a love that isn't bound by judgment, fear, or need. The chapter begins by highlighting how, in our everyday lives, love is often conditional. We tend to love based on what others do for us, how they make us feel, or how they align with our beliefs and values. Our love is frequently rooted in expectations, whether conscious or unconscious, leading to disappointment, resentment, and heartache when those expectations aren't met. Conditional love, the author explains, is driven by the mind's needs and desires. It is transactional rather than transformational, limited by the fluctuations of our thoughts and emotions. But unconditional love, the author reveals, is not limited by these mental conditions. It is a love that flows freely, unimpeded by judgment, fear, or attachment. This form of love does not depend on the behavior or approval of others. It arises from a deeper connection to ourselves and the present moment. Unconditional love is born from stillness, awareness, and acceptance, allowing us to love others and ourselves without the constraints of expectation. When we love unconditionally, we let go of the need for control or validation and simply allow love to flow in its purest form. The author emphasizes that to experience unconditional love, we must first learn to love ourselves in this way. Self-love in its truest form is not about self-indulgence or narcissism, but about embracing who we are without judgment. It's about accepting ourselves fully, our flaws, our fears, and our mistakes, and loving ourselves without trying to fix or change anything. Self-love is a radical act of acceptance and presence, and it is only through this unconditional love of self that we can begin to extend that love to others. Another key point the chapter makes is that unconditional love does not require us to sacrifice our boundaries or well-being for others. Love, in its purest form, does not demand that we lose ourselves in the name of others' happiness. Instead, it invites us to honor our own truth, to love and care for ourselves, and to express love from a place of fullness. Unconditional love isn't about giving away all of our energy or becoming a martyr. It's about recognizing that love is limitless, and when we love ourselves unconditionally, we can offer that same love freely to others without depletion or compromise. The author also highlights how the practice of unconditional love transforms our relationships with others. When we stop loving based on conditions, we allow people to be who they truly are without judgment or expectation. This doesn't mean tolerating behavior that harms us or others, but rather releasing the need to control or change people to meet our desires. By loving unconditionally, we have the space for others to show up authentically, which deepens our connection with them and fosters mutual respect and understanding. It's in this space of unconditional love that true intimacy and healing can occur, both within ourselves and with those around us. The chapter concludes by reminding us that unconditional love is not a distant ideal or something we must strive for. It is a natural state of being. It exists within us already, waiting to be discovered and expressed. When we let go of our attachment to thoughts, judgments, and expectations, we tap into the wellspring of love that flows through us all. Unconditional love is not something we have to earn or find. It's something we simply need to allow and embody. By embracing this love, we create a life of greater peace, freedom, and connection, where the bonds we form with ourselves and others are grounded in the deepest, most authentic form of love. And that's a wrap on Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen, a profound reminder that peace begins when we rethink our relationship with our thoughts. If this resonated with you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the Book Lounge for more transformative reads. I want to hear from you. What stood out the most? What was your biggest takeaway? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know what book or topic you'd love for me to cover next. Plus, don't miss the free book summary of the audiobook. Click the link in the description to grab your copy. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time in the Book Lounge.